Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lecture we look at arguments in functions. There are four kinds of arguments: required arguments, keyword arguments, default arguments, and flexible arguments or variable length arguments. Arguments are very important in Python. So far we have looked at arguments in function definitions. So we have function and then name of our function, and then we have 0 or more arguments inside the parentheses. So the arguments we've seen so far are called required arguments. That means if we pass an argument in this parenthesis, and then later when we call our function, if we don't pass any argument in that function name, we're gonna get an error. Those are required arguments. Next, we look at keyword arguments. So as the name implies, keyword arguments, we call those when we call our function, and the caller of the function has to identify the argument by passing the parameter name. Let's look at an example. Let's create a function called person, and let's say we have 2 or 3 arguments for that function. Let's pass name, age, and then state. Okay, and that function will simply print name of the person, will print age of the person, and then it will finally print the state of the person. Okay, once we define our function, we can call our function, which is person, and then in keyword arguments the caller has to identify the parameters. So we can say name is equal to, let's say, John, and then age is equal to, let's say, 45, and then state is equal to New York, and then run it. So we have John, 45, and New York. So this is an example of a keyword argument. The caller has to specify the argument or parameter by calling the parameter or argument name. Similarly, if we look at another example, let's say define, and let's have a function that will subtract 2 numbers. Subtract, let's pass 2 arguments or parameters, let's say num1 and num2, and that function will simply print num1 minus num2. So if we call our function subtract, then num1 is equal to 9, and then num2 is equal to 7. Run it, we get 2. So these are examples of keyword arguments. The caller has to specifically pass or identify the parameter name. Okay, next let's look at default arguments. So in case of default arguments, the function will assume some default value if no value is passed. Okay, let's look at an example. Let's see the same function, define person, and let's pass 3 arguments: name, age, and state. We can make one of these arguments default by setting it to be equal to some value. let's say state is equal to New York. Okay, and this function will print the name of the person, age, and then state. So in this example, state is a default argument, and we set it to be equal to New York. So if we call our person function, person, and then pass, let's say, name is equal to John, age is equal to 43, and then state, let's say, DC. In this case, if we run the statement, DC will be printed for state. However, we don't necessarily have to pass state in our function call. So if we only pass name and age, that's absolutely fine in this example. So let me run it and show you. So we get John, 43, and New York. So here in this example, if a parameter or argument is not passed in the function call, the default value of that parameter will be used. That's why we get New York for the state. Okay, so person. However, if we only pass, let's say, name, and then let's say just John, if we run this, we'll get an error. It will say 3 arguments expected, but we only passed 2. Let me run it and show you the error. So we get a type error. It says person takes at least 2 arguments, 1 is given, right? It takes at least 2 arguments, name and age. And this is the default argument. So we have to pass age also. Age is equal to, let's say, 34. Run it now. We're not gonna get an error. And as I mentioned earlier, if we don't have a default, if we don't want to use this default value, we can pass state as the third argument or parameter, right? We can say, let's say, New Jersey, and then New Jersey will be printed. So those are default arguments, and we can make more than one of our arguments default. For instance, I can set name to be equal to, let's say, Jane, and in this case, all I need to pass is age. Let's say 33, and the default values for the parameter's name and state will be used. So in this example, we got an error. It says non-default argument follows default argument. Another thing while using this default arguments is that all of our default arguments have to come after the non-default arguments. Okay, that's what this error is about. So in this case, age is a non-default argument, so I have to pass the age attribute before all the default arguments. Okay, that's important. Let's run it again. Now we have Jane, 33, and then state is New York. Let's look at one more example. Let's look at our subtract function. Then we'll pass, let's say, num1, num2, and then num3. Then we can simply say print num1 minus num2 minus num3. Okay, And let's set num3 to have a default value of 2. Now if we call our subtract function, and let's pass 3 values for our num1, num2, and num3, we can say 7, 3, and 1. Let's run this. We get 3. So 7 minus 3 is 4. 4 minus 1 is 3. So this is an example of using a required argument, right? Because those 3 arguments are required. Or we could have also said num1 is equal to 7, num2 is equal to 3, and then num3 is equal to 1. Example of keyword arguments, we get the same result. And the order doesn't matter. For instance, I can say here num2 is equal to 3. So changing the order doesn't matter. Here num2 is equal to 3, num1 is equal to 7, num3 is equal to 1. It will specifically assign the value for the specified attribute in the specified place. Okay? And this will give us the same result, 3. And if we don't pass our num3 argument, the default value for that attribute will be used. In this case, the result will be num1 is 7, 7 minus 3 is 4, and 4 minus 2 is 2. So if we run this, we get 2. Okay? Those are examples of keyword arguments and default arguments. And in the previous lectures, we have looked at required arguments. And in the next lecture, we'll look at variable length arguments. Thank you, everyone.